Good afternoon and welcome. Very happy to be joined by a great group of folks who are quite diverse in the data center field. We have a very limited amount of time today, so we are going to do as much as we can and cover as much as we can about the data center space and kind of the next wave and where we're heading in a limited amount of time. We'll also try and take some Q&A at the end. I'm going to start by passing over to Todd, and then we'll just do quick intros, a little bit about the company, and then we'll have a little open discussion.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Todd Coleman. I'm the president and CEO of eStruxture Data Centers. We're a Canadian-based, carrier-neutral, cloud-neutral data center platform, both retail and wholesale elements. We have, as of yesterday, announced our 5th data center in Canada. We have 3 data centers in Montreal, 2 in Vancouver, focused in combination on high power density in the right markets. So our target customer is anywhere from 20 to 30 kilowatts a rack. Obviously, we have customers that do a lot less than that as well. But we're building data centers in and around large deposits of fiber optic, but then target after customers that are going after hyperscale, multi-megawatt type deployments.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Oliver Jones. I'm the chief executive of Chayora. Chayora is a Hong Kong headquartered developer, investor, and operator of hyperscale data center campuses in mainland China. We're focusing on developing a series of 300 megawatt plus campuses for international cloud, domestic cloud, and international co-location businesses to access what today is the biggest market in the world. China has 800 million internet users, growing at 50 million users a year, and has the unique attribute of being only accessible if you have servers inside the national firewall. Our principal development at the moment, we have our first facility just outside Beijing, a market of 150 million people, where we're developing a campus which will be about 25,000 racks. We launched our first facility at the beginning of this month.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Brown, President and CEO of DataGryd in New York. We're the single largest data center in the iconic 60 Hudson Street. One of the things that most folks don't realize about DataGryd is that we have a couple of unique assets. One is a direct feed from the utility. We actually have more power than we have space. We just launched yesterday a 1 megawatt data hall on the 6th floor, so we're excited about what's to take place in 2019. Our target has kind of moved down a bit. We originally were more of a full floor, half floor, 1 megawatt and above. We recognize that the paradigm has shifted, and we're looking to accommodate folks 100 kW, 250, 500, and allow them to grow into the space.
I think we'll start off by, that there's a lot going on within technology today, and a lot of buzzwords, IoT, edge, hyperscale, which you mentioned, Todd, and I think, I think we want to really talk about, where are you seeing the growth, not just in specifically, I think it's really around 6 to 8 customers or large companies are looking for this hyperscale space. Do you see that? Is that going to run out at some point? Are we neglecting an area of the business that we should be looking at? And then also, I would say sort of part 2 to that is the edge, we're talking about it, it's a lot of buzz going on, but has it really evolved yet? And so jump in as good.
So I think I was talking to someone earlier today. I think there's risk that if everyone starts building hyperscale facilities, we're chasing after a relatively small customer set that's driving a tremendous amount of growth, right? Yes. And is their growth going to end anytime soon? Obviously, we don't think so. But we probably add, there's new names that get added to the list, and obviously not everyone's looking to take down 30 megawatts, but the multi-megawatt game continues to play. I think there is a risk that we continue to design facilities that are earmarked for those sort of what we consider to be hyperscalers today, and we missed that group that probably in the sort of the US nomenclature used to be considered a wholesale customer, pod and a meg. Yep. Now we don't go after pod and a meg anymore. Yep. Wholesale in other markets like Canada really isn't the wholesale where it's like a bring your own engineer and own architecture party, but it's, hey, we want to move in and we want all the attributes that come along with traditional retail colo, but we want it at a price point that is based on economies of scale. There is this risk that you then design your facilities around that, and that market from basically 0 to 500 kW or maybe up to a megawatt gets a little left behind. But in our case, from an eStruxture perspective, we target both, and we have facilities for both of those markets. But I do think that there's a risk where everyone's plowing money into hyperscale facilities in large markets where you're losing a little bit of, not to mix the words, but sort of the traditional edge data centers, where you're talking tier 2, tier 3 facilities. They look more like a retail customer. You target 1 to 50 cabinets. They may still be doing high density, but there's plenty of applications out there that is still driving that demand curve.
I also think too that the definition of edge is broad, right? What is the edge, right? You just discussed tier 2 and tier 3 markets, but take the market of New York City Metro. Well, we can define ourselves as an edge data center right now just because of the emergence of these new technologies. So I think that's going to continue to evolve. I don't know if there's a right edge definition, but I think it plays into whether it's in those tier 2 or tier 3 markets, as well as a dense metro like New York City.
I mean, to add my piece to that, I think one of the interesting features that we're all going to have to grapple with is I don't think it's a choice between the two. I think we're going to see significant growth in edge data centers and hyperscale hubs, if you like, and particularly as we go through the transition. The city of Tianjin, which is on the edge of Beijing, is a city probably most people here have never heard of. It's twice the size of London in population terms, 16 million people. And they made an announcement corresponding with the Chinese leader's statement that he wants China to be the world leader in AI by 2030, that Tianjin City is going to invest $18 billion as a city in research and development for AI. Now, as you transition to application of AI into some activities, they are just going to be pure edge. If you look at the application into areas like, for example, driverless cars and maybe pilotless drones that we will see increasingly, one of the features that people often forget is that the engineering interpretation of that says 99.99% of the data that you capture is going to be of no use at all once you've gone around the corner or once you've undertaken a certain activity. Often people forget the lawyers, because in the first few years of moving into driverless cars and pilotless drones and so forth, the absolute imperative to capture and hold every single ounce of data is going to be off the chart. And I think we probably underestimate the extent to which hyperscale and central storage is going to be required. The social aspect, I think, of, if you like, IoT and the like, has yet to really hit home. And perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I think that there's a very important capacity that means one's got to be able to support the implementation of edge, because I'm really not quite sure where it's going to go across all sectors, nor I'm sure are most of us here.
Yeah, and as you've all said, I don't think it's really taken off yet. I think we're still waiting to see when it will, really take force. I think the edge is clearly, as we become more of a, digital infrastructure continues to grow, I think you'll see growth within the edge. You all brought up something that's really, a pressing issue and need. Todd, you talked about, building out more dense space. What I'm seeing in the data center space, I think we talked a little bit about this, is equipment is requiring much more power today. And power is always a challenge. And it'd be great to hear kind of where you're seeing, more and more of the larger hyperscaler folks are using equipment that's 20 kVA per cab, which is definitely draining. Where do you see, do you see power rates changing? Do you, how do you effectively keep competitive to ensure with the various folks that are building data centers?
Yeah, so I think we could talk for an hour on all those things.
Absolutely.
It's funny, so we believe in power densification of our cabinets. We're, all of our builds are sort of targeted 30 kilowatts a rack without having to strand a whole bunch of space, without having to do Herculean things on the cooling strategy. Even in our downtown, what would otherwise be considered to be retail carrier dense facilities, our target's 30 kilowatts a rack. We're actually seeing, and so we work with our customers to increase their densification if that means that we're bringing in 48U instead of 42U cabinets, if that's what drives that revenue model, that's great for us from a cost perspective. I think that's different than a lot of traditional data centers historically have been. But we're actually seeing a trend with two of the hyperscalers that I'm aware of, so two doesn't necessarily make a trend, but it's interesting. They're decreasing their densification on a cabinet level. They're spreading their density out on greater space than where they originally thought. When they sit back and look at their utilization levels and where they're at, they're actually reducing their power. So in our model, the folks, the users that are pushing densification into 18, 22, 30 kilowatts a rack don't tend to be the hyperscale cloud providers. I mean, they're pretty, sort of 10 to 12 to 14. There's other applications. We see extreme densification in the VFX, the film studios. There's, the financial guys tend to push it. So I think there's other users out there that are pushing it. And then, of course, you still have that scenario where what you ask for and what you utilize on a regular basis, other than in peak demand, is different. So I think the trend is pushing densification up, but in some areas it's settling back down. But what all of us used to see and think was high density 5 years ago at 6 to 8 kW, I mean, that's low density today.
Exactly.
It is interesting. I think I'm working in, I hate to call China an emerging market because it's anything from that, second largest economy in the world. But actually, in many respects, particularly on the technology side, what China has done in many industries is that it has watched, it has learned, it has developed ideas, and then leapfrogged, what is taking place in other parts of the world. Now, much of the legacy data center platforms in China are currently still designed and operating at 3 to 5 kilowatts a rack. The big cloud providers, the Allies and the Tencents, in the last year or two have moved very much into line with what Todd, you were saying there, 8 through 10, maybe 12 kilowatts a rack. We think it's imperative when designing infrastructure that isn't being designed for 2019. This is being designed fundamentally to take us into 2030, 2040, because that's where the capital needs to go to, that we have the capacity to develop in a flexible way to whatever might come. And that's a really big challenge. For us, it comes down to, have we got the fundamentals right? Have you got the land that's in the right place? Have you got access to the right kind of power? Have you got it available at the right kind of price? And hugely importantly, how on earth are you going to deal with the different forms of connectivity that goes with that? But we're seeing unquestionably designs that we're designing our facilities to go 30, 40 kilowatts a rack with hotspots above that. And we're not quite sure where it's going to go, but we know that what China will tend to do is they won't follow the same path that we followed in North America, for example. It'll be big step changes, and I think we'll see a big leap forward where in the next couple of years, some really interesting stuff's being developed by some of the big hyperscale players in China at the moment.
You guys make a good point. We just recently had an inquiry, which was interesting. 80 kW for one cabinet, right? It was an airline manufacturer that just needed to have it in one rack, and we had to take a step back. And in our environment at 60 Hudson Street, in particular in DataGryd, is we're building it from raw space. So once we know up front what the requirement is, there's not going to be a challenge with the compromising of heat disbursement. So it was interesting, and they needed cooling right to the chip, right? Yep. And that's something that can be done. So to your question, Tony, I don't think it's the requirements that are coming down, or spread out for that matter.
I mean, I think we all still play to the law of averages, right? You still know that you're going to have, in some cases, you still see 3 kilowatt racks sitting right next to a 12 kW rack. Sure. You're going to play the law of averages. We've seen it. I'm sure you'll see it. These 80 kW requests, particularly from the universities that are doing supercompute nodes. Those are going to stretch your engineering, and you're almost building a data center within a data center if you want to go after that target. For sure you are. Your second part of your question was cost of power and where you build. For those of you that have paid any attention, if Canada's on your radar at all, I mean, there's been some recent announcements in the last couple of weeks. We certainly pay attention to the cost of power. We're a regional play within Canada. I look at markets, so I'll give you an example. If you look at Montreal, some of the least expensive power in all of North America on a USD basis, if you're sort of above 10 megawatts, you're in the 3 US cents range-ish. But you go 500 kilometers or 300 miles away to Toronto, commercial hub of Canada, telco hub of Canada, financial hub of Canada,
Different
and
story.
the power is almost 3x. And the amount of demand that's gone into Toronto over the last 10 years and still goes there is significantly more than what's gone into Montreal, albeit I suspect Montreal is about to catch up and surpass that. Everyone believes that. But I still get questions on why aren't you in Toronto? And the demand side of me says, okay, for sure. The rational, economic side of me runs the numbers and says, why does this ever make sense? Why does anyone want to pay 3 times the price per kilowatt hour? But yet they do.
But there are broader things. I agree with you
There
totally.
are broader things.
The parallels, and it's not quite Montreal and Toronto in this particular case, but I was up in Inner Mongolia 2 weeks ago. And Inner Mongolia is renowned for having very low-cost power, maybe 50% of what we will deliver on the outskirts of Beijing. But actually, you've got to look at the ability to deliver an operation in that environment. There's a trade-off to be made. Fiber connectivity is more challenging. Hiring people, to go and work up on the Mongolian steppe is an interesting challenge. There's not much nightlife, and it's unless you're favored Bactrian camels and woolly mammoths and things of that sort, it's a really interesting, beautiful part of the world. But it presents different challenges, and I think you have to look at the overall performance and the total cost of ownership, I think, in that regard. But undoubtedly, to your point, power has to be a major consideration given the importance.
Mentioned 5G, IoT. I think we spend a lot of time focusing on data centers. But one of the big differentiators is obviously the fiber that comes in and out of the facilities. There's been a huge consolidation of fiber providers today. There are some unique fiber providers being built today. How much does that play into your customer's preference or your customer's decision around where they're going within the DC space? The hyperscalers obviously want to have dark coming into the facility, but do you think it's time where we see a resurgence of additional fiber players coming into the space? And I think, obviously fiber plays a pretty important role with the DCs today.
Well, I think you're obviously with 5G, capital intensity on the network is going to go up. You're going to, just like being in the data center business, you're going to have some fairly deep pockets and be comfortable with capital intensity and longer paybacks.
Absolutely.
And in the fiber world, where you sort of ignore the sunk cost of capital and you're only looking at the incremental and you think you have 12-month paybacks, but what's already in the ground you're just going to sort of ignore on the back of the napkin. I think that's challenging. To bring, look, cities aren't, they're restricting how you dig up the streets. There's not a lot of people still digging up the streets. Those that are digging up the streets are bringing on more on-net buildings, so it's a different play. So really, in some ways you're expanding the edge. Do I think that we're going to see a resurgence of more fiber providers? In certain markets where you have a metro play, probably, but not like we saw, 10, 15 years ago. I think that's done, and the capital intensity of that is way bigger. Now, that's not to say that someone can't go and further consolidate further and whatnot, but I'm not seeing that today. I mean, those that are building are those that, they came across a 15-mile ring and, voila, let's see if we can expand it. Those aren't bad little businesses, but that's small by comparison to what we're talking about.
In particular, Tony, in the New York City Metro, you're seeing, especially what the hyperscalers are dictating, is diversity. And forensically, they look at their network, particularly for load balancing, and you're now seeing new diverse routes. So not necessarily new providers, but augments to, and that provides diversity, certainly in the metro.
And I mean, I think they're constantly looking for inroads in and out of cities. Like, the concept of what happens if New York goes dark? How do we fail over? Where's that traffic going to go? What happens if DC gets hit? I think those are challenges that everyone continues to look at. And so, I think as data center operators, we constantly are having those conversations with our network partners to say, what else do you have? Because those are both good for the network business, but they're great for our business if we can tell a story that says, this, not just the data center, but the market is not going to get stranded because of some catastrophic event.
Diversity and
now, mine's a bit of an outlier there, of course, because
I was going to say,
carrier neutrality, which we offer, of course, on our campuses in China, but carrier neutrality in China means probably 3, maybe at most 5 different carriers, and that's a different challenge. I think that will change in China. I don't think it's going to change anytime fast, but actually the plethora of, I'll call them tier 2 network solutions providers is the key to being able to get the best. We work very closely with the big 3 carriers. They have incredible ambitions, incredible resources, but it's a little bit like, cast your mind back, perhaps in public ownership terms, 25, 30 years here and in Western Europe, where there's a high dependency on the national telcos. China isn't always going to follow the way of the West in this regard, but I think being creative in trying to deliver for the international hyperscalers, something that assures them of best potential value in the circumstance is what it's about. Long-term commitment to accommodating diversity and additional fiber carriers coming in, and getting creative, because there will be new technologies that will enable us to work more closely with them. So our challenge is a little different from the ones here, but I aspire to have 200 carriers coming through our sort of internet exchange. It will be interesting.
We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to just pause to see if there's any questions. Yeah. Microphone.
Neven from Netera in Bulgaria. Sorry. You were talking about 30 kilowatt and up to 80 kilowatt per rack. How do you cool that? What do you think about liquid cooling? Do you employ anything like that? And what is it that you're using?
Well, from an 80 kilowatt perspective, it's not a traditional means of cooling. You would definitely have to look outside and look at specific equipment that could address that, and it's available today. But again, as I said, that's something I thought was unique. But when we went and investigated and talked to some of our vendors, they're like, absolutely, we can do that. So.
At 80 kilowatts, you're definitely into liquid cooling,
Yep.
and you're likely taking it to the chip level. It's a very different cooling technology. At 30 and below, you can do anything from in-row cooling units to managing your airflow to, I mean, that's 30 on down is it's all about your engineering and your overall design. You shouldn't be doing any superhuman tricks. Above 30, you start to get into either hotspots or you're doing more unique things. Certainly at 80, that's a specific deployment.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay. I've got, I think, just one more in closing. Kind of where do you see the next 24 months going with the data center business? What's the hot item? I know we talked about edge, which I think we all agree it's somewhat delayed, but where's the next? Where do we see sort of the next wave of data centers? Where's everything headed? Is it micro data centers? Is it traditional hyperscalers? What are your thoughts?
Look, I suspect it's all of the above, which is a really generic answer.
No, that's fair.
Look, there is no shortage of capital wanting to push into the data center space. I think we have a little bit of deal euphoria going on with multiples being bid up, and that's always a little bit alarming because when you have ultra deal euphoria, tends to be followed by irrational behavior on the outer side. So you got to watch that. But look, what do I think I'm going to see? I suspect there's going to be more consolidation. There's going to be more capital being deployed across virtually every single market. You're going to, the larger players from an operator perspective are going to want to expand into new areas and find new ways of growing their revenue and their EBITDA. Will you see micro and macro type data centers? Yes, of course. 2 years is like, you measure that in dog years, lots can change. So there probably, won't be the three of us sitting up here 2 years from now. It'll be someone else that's doing the same thing we're doing. But I don't see the growth slowing down. At the end of the day, whether you can define edge, which none of us really can, because we'll have 10 different definitions, just like we were with cloud 4 or 5 years ago. What we all believe in is the proliferation of data. And at the end of the day, there's a stat that's out there, whether you believe it or not, less than 1% of the world's total data actually is housed in a data center. If you believe that, whether it's 1%, 2%, we're not talking about we're at 90%, we're looking to grab another point. Take 1% to 2% and you know that we don't have enough data center space, whether it's micro or macro level, hyperscale or at the edge.
Just very briefly, I think the slightly different take, because I agree with those points, but to expand it, I think we've seen a number of things over recent years associated with data sovereignty, with GDPR, with the personal interface with government, society, and data. I suspect in the next couple of years we'll see some very big civil liberty cases coming out. I think we'll start to see some reaction to the amount of data that's being held. In China it's very common that facial recognition is off the chart in where it's adopted there. In other markets, I think people are going to suddenly see some big legal cases that will transform the approach that many companies using our platforms have for data. I think that will be a different factor. We mustn't lose sight of that social aspect.
Tony, I think being prepared is really paramount in the coming years, right? We're going to continue to see the evolution of AI and IoT and 5G. It really hasn't been deployed in a way that we feel comfortable. But one of the things that we did as a company is making sure that you have ample power, right? And power is paramount. And today we have ample power to look into 3 to 5 years to see what that power requirement is going to be. And I think that's one of the things that we can't underestimate.
Very good.
We're out of time. Thank you, Todd, Oliver, and Tom. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of PTC.
Thank you.
Thanks.